Right now, we're discussing Trump's urgent decision to eliminate Putin's minister and powerful explosions in Russia. We talk about that and more with Roman Svitan. Roman, great to welcome you. Thank you for joining us. We wish you all good health. Friends, like this video, leave comments with your thoughts on the topics we're discussing, particularly Trump's decision and the elimination of the minister. Write also from what cities and countries you are watching us.
Бажаю всім здоров'я. Друзі, одразу ставте цьому відео лайк, пишіть свої коментарі щодо тих тем, які ми будемо обговорювати прямо зараз, щодо рішення Трампа, щодо ліквідації путінського міністра. Все прямо зараз під цим відео. І традиційно також цікаво знати, звідки нас дивляться, ваше місто, ваша країна.
How correct is it to link this to the fighting in Kursk? Roman, what do you connect this suicide with, or perhaps it is more correct to speak of Starovoit's liquidation? What do you know about it? It is interesting that it was during this period that the armed forces of Ukraine entered the territory of Kursk region. Let's start with the fact that the day before, Russian propaganda and war correspondents published information that former Transportation Minister Starovoit, whom Putin had recently dismissed from his post, had shot himself in Russia. There are pictures of him and a decree to that effect. According to reports, Starovoit committed suicide after he was sent into retirement. It is worth noting that for a while he served as governor of the Kursk region. Couldn't bear the stigma of petty grudges. Most likely it was suicide. Reason: dismissal, mostly due to miscalculations related to failure to ensure flight safety. He failed. Now Russian aviation is in serious trouble after flying our drones. There is also a criminal trail related to the tens of billions of rubles written off for defense of the Kursk area when he was governor. His successor is also under investigation and is likely to end up the same way, either by shooting himself or throwing himself out of a window. It has become a habit there. The fewer high-ranking intelligence officers Russia has left, the better.
Закончит примерно так же. Либо застрелится, либо выбросится из окна. Они там специалисты по этому вопросу. Чем меньше топовых спецов у россиян остается, тем лучше.
Friends, what do you think about the situation with the liquidation or suicide of the former governor of Kursk region? Write your opinion under this video and support Roman Svitan's analysis with a like. Roman, there is news about personnel changes in Russia. Former first deputy chairman of Rosgvardia Strigunov has been detained in a case of abuse of power. This is reported by the Russian media. What can you say about this? Recently, there has been an increase in criminal cases against officials there. How do you explain such activity? In war, many people seek to make a profit. Any armed conflict becomes an opportunity for people with impure intentions and thirst for profit. During hostilities, such people appear in great numbers. The problem is that they speculate on an acute and sensitive topic, which makes it difficult at first to distinguish a real expert from a fraudster. Later, law enforcement agencies begin to identify such fraudsters, most often those who simply did not get a share. This is especially true in Russia, where the old Soviet system with its characteristic approach of the law enforcement agencies is in place.
Правоохранительные органы, которым не досталось, скорее всего, то есть не поделились. А в основном, если это касается россиян, допустим, это старый советский подход, еще мусорской.
If you share it, there are no problems. If you don't share it, there are difficulties. The wave of investigations that is now sweeping across Russia is directly related to the war and to those who did not share with the right people. Therefore, the more criminal cases, the higher the level of anxiety among the Russian administrative apparatus, the better for us. From this point of view, what is happening should be perceived positively. Let them imprison as many as possible. This is absolutely fair. Moving on to other news. The day before, there was an explosion in the Moscow region. Unknown drones hit a factory specializing in military chemicals. Roman, what do you know about this? We have the video. Let's watch it again and move on to the discussion. Russian media reported that this plant also supplies ammunition. What do you know about this military facility? How important is it for the Russian army, and what consequences for the enemy can already be assessed?
Також російські ЗМІ писали про те, що цей завод, зокрема, і постачає і боєприпаси. Що вам відомо про цей військовий об'єкт? Чи він важливий для росіян? Та про які наслідки для ворога вам вже відомо?
We have several special units that are engaged in the use of long-range means of defeat. These are the Security Service of Ukraine, the main intelligence directorate, and the Special Operations Forces, which have their own systems. The Unmanned Systems Unit under the command of Magyar has an entire regiment, the 14th Regiment of Unmanned Aerial Systems. They mainly use drones of this type. Since there was no confirmation from the GUR or the SBU, I believe that this is the work of our army to destroy a military facility. The factory in Sergiev Posad produced gunpowder and chemical components for Russian ammunition, so it was to be destroyed as part of the fulfillment of a combat mission. A breakthrough of the Russian frontal air defense was competently prepared, followed by an approach and the precise defeat of a military facility. As a result, the Russians had to suspend operations at a significant part of the airfields near Moscow for several hours, effectively bringing them to a complete standstill. The main damage was probably economic. The losses from the failed flights amount to hundreds of millions of dollars. However, the strike on the military facility was also effective. This dual approach, economic and military at the same time, looks thoughtful and effective. Russia loses money and at the same time is forced to suspend the technological cycle of production of gunpowder and ammunition. Excellent work on the part of those who carried this out. Roman, let's talk about the losses of Russian military aviation. The day before, preliminary information appeared about the destruction of a Tu-160 strategic bomber. We are waiting for official confirmation or denial from the intelligence services or the general staff. The approximate cost of this airplane is about $300 million. We have already discussed with you the topic of strategic aviation during the special operation Spider's Web. What can you say about this case on the basis of the available information? How would you assess the overall resource of the Tu-160s that Russia has left? And how, in your opinion, does Operation Web and subsequent strikes on strategic targets affect the course of the war and the situation at the front?
Спецоперація Павутина змінила хід війни, і ті подальші ліквідації стратегії, вони впливають на поле бою.
Operation Spider's Web didn't hit the Tu-160s then. It was mostly the Tu-95s and A-50s that were hit. Tu-160 remained intact for some reason. Now there is preliminary information about the destruction or damage to one of the Tu-160, but it has not yet been confirmed. It will be possible to talk about it substantively only after official confirmation from the GSD, the General Staff, or the appearance of relevant information in bulletins with explanations. Russia has several dozen such aircraft, some of which were previously transferred by Ukraine and are now being used against us, like the Tu-95, as well as the Kh-55 and Kh-22 missiles that are launched on our territory. Kuchma and Kravchuk made serious mistakes in their time. One has already passed away, the other seems to be preparing, but neither of them has ever been held accountable for this betrayal and treason against Ukraine. It was because of the transferred planes and missiles that our infrastructure was damaged and civilians were killed. These planes are now in the possession of the Russians. We are talking about the Tu-160 long-range strategic bomber, a supersonic missile carrier capable of dropping airborne missiles. It is equipped with 2 drums, each of which holds 6 missiles, such as the X-101. One Tu-160 can carry up to 12 such missiles, and when refueled, cover a distance of more than 1,000 kilometers. Although it does not affect us directly very often, the consequences are still tangible. Russia can use these planes, and their destruction is essential. They are rarely used because operating the Tu-160 is very costly. One flight requires refueling with up to 3 railroad tanks of aviation kerosene. In comparison, the Tu-95 to perform combat missions is easier and cheaper. The Tu-160 is used infrequently, but remains a key element of Russia's strategic aviation, especially in the nuclear component. It is the airborne part of Russia's nuclear triad. The Russians carefully guard these airplanes, scattering them to different airfields, trying to shelter them from possible strikes, from Oleni to the borders with Ukraine and even to the Far East.
Россияне их берегут как зеницу ока, сейчас рассредоточили по разным точкам, попытались их растянуть практически от Олении до Украинки, а там еще и до Анадыря, куда они их только не прятали.
Most likely one of the drones or one of our agents performed a combat mission to destroy this type of aircraft. Russia is no longer capable of producing them from scratch. The Kazan aircraft factory, which supposedly produces new airplanes, is actually refining the remaining hulls from Soviet times. These airplanes are more than 30 years old. They are disassembled, reconstructed, re-equipped, and passed off as new, but this is more of a reconstruction than a full-fledged production. Therefore, every loss of such an airplane is extremely painful for Russia. We hope that this is not the last airplane we will take out of service. Roman, there is information from Russian military correspondents that mobile internet has been turned off in Kamchatka to protect it from possible drone attacks. It is worth noting that this region is located about 7,500 kilometers from Ukraine. What do you know about this? How reasonable is it to say that Ukrainian drones are able to fly at such a distance? What important facilities are located in this area? And is it possible that a scenario similar to what we saw during the special operation Spider's Web could be repeated? I would not say that drones are flying, rather they are appearing. It is extremely difficult for a drone to cover a distance of more than 7,000 kilometers. It is theoretically possible, but most of the payload would be spent on fuel, which makes such a task almost impossible. However, they can appear in the right place, as it has already happened, for example, in the area of Chita, Ukrainka, or Belaya, near Chita. The main thing is to deliver the drone to the place of launch. This can be done in different ways, in a railroad, automobile, or sea container. It does not matter how. The main thing is that they get there and fulfill the combat mission. This is possible. We have excellent quantum physicists, so with effort, we could create a transition mechanism to appear at the right point. How it happens is less important than completing the mission. Now they're especially active in the Far East, including Eastern Russia, where the so-called Far Eastern Ukrainian People's Republic, the Green Wedge, is located. This territory is designated as a People's Republic and was formed more than 100 years ago, in 1917. In 1922 it was dispersed by the Russian VCHK, but the confidence of the Republic survived. I think they continue to be involved in such tasks as concerned participants. We have mentioned more than once the destruction of an oil refinery in Komsomolsk-on-Amur, the recent explosion on a gas pipeline that supplied a military unit, including the 155th Brigade in Vladivostok, and the burning of warehouses in Transbaikalia. All these are actions on the eastern direction. There are enough people there ready to carry out such tasks. It is possible to get a drone and strike a military facility, especially since there are many such facilities in that region, including airfields.
Получить беспилотник и выполнить удар по военному объекту. А на том направлении достаточно много военных объектов, кстати, включая в том числе и аэродром.
The day before, the Western press, in particular the Wall Street Journal, reported that Putin is preparing the elite for continuous attacks against Ukraine. The piece notes that Moscow is intensifying ground operations and bombing of Ukrainian cities, and the war is moving into its fourth summer. Journalists also draw attention to the problems with Ukrainian air defense. Roman, how do you assess this material? How reasonable is it to say that Putin is preparing a campaign of continuous attacks? Does Russia have enough resources for massive drone and missile strikes? And how would you characterize the enemy's current tactics? Any attack is prepared for a specific task. No one conducts an attack for the sake of attacking, except when political objectives are being pursued or attempts to intimidate civilians. From a military point of view, strikes are carried out on the basis of intelligence about the location and filling of certain objects. Each operation is planned individually, depending on the target. Such attacks cannot be frequent or massive, also because Russian intelligence does not work as effectively as they would like. And we don't have many targets that can be covered with long-range military weapons, So if any attacks are being prepared, they will mostly be directed at civilian objects, at infrastructure in the mode of such genocidal terrorist attacks. It's possible, but it's more politics. That is, there is more politics than military components. The Russians now, while there are still some negotiations on the surrender of Ukraine, they will definitely use this mechanism to pressure the civilian population to surrender and the military political leadership of Ukraine to make a decision unnecessary for Ukraine. That possibility is what it is. The question of technical possibility is technical. Can the Russians, let's say, often use massive attacks? At the moment, it is not possible to use them often. Well, based on the number of, let's say, drones and missiles produced, about once a week the Russians are capable of organizing a serious attack using up to 500 drones of various types. Some of them are decoys, under the cover of which dozens of missiles are launched, mostly cruise missiles, sometimes ballistic missiles. We see such attacks almost every week. They will probably continue to operate in this mode. Preparing a cruise missile strike, from reconnaissance to strike, takes about a week. Assembling the required number of drones, about 500-600, also takes about a week. They produce about 150-200 drones per day, but use 50-100 since the attacks are almost daily. We have already adapted to this rhythm, so we can expect them to conduct massive strikes once a week. The specific goals and objectives become clear after the attack itself. Roman, to continue the topic, our military showed a Russian Shahed drone next to a serviceman to visualize its size and to remind us of the threat it poses. How would you assess the evolution of this drone from its introduction to today? How dangerous is it? How has it changed over the course of the war? And what challenges do we now face in the context of drone attacks? We have been clarifying for at least 6 months that it is not the Shahed, but the geranium. Shahed is an Iranian unmanned aerial vehicle, the contract for the delivery of which was signed until 2022. According to various reports, Iran handed over about 2,000 of these drones to Russia. A figure of 300 was heard. After the contract was fulfilled, the Iranians helped the Russians launch their own production. However, both the Iranian Shaheds and the Russian geraniums had most of their components of Chinese origin. Now the main intelligence directorate confirms that the share of Chinese parts exceeds 65%. Today we received confirmation from the main intelligence directorate, for which we thank them very much. They made clarifications to the previously announced data and have now clearly presented the information. About 65% of the components in the Russian uranium are Chinese-made. Iranian parts have not been there for a long time, especially after the strikes on Iranian factories where the Shaheds were manufactured by Israeli forces. These strikes did not affect deliveries to Russia, because the geraniums are assembled from Chinese components. In addition, Russian and Belarusian parts are used. In particular, the Progress plant in Russia produces the hulls, and the Belarusian Belavia supplies elements of the defense systems, which are manufactured in Vitebsk.
Часть российских деталей, часть белорусских, Белавия, кстати, поставляет. Российские в основном в НИР Прогресс, там корпус льют, в том числе россияне. Белавия поставляет некоторые механизмы защиты, спасения, это в Витебске находится.
In Russian geraniums, one finds both French and American parts, mostly obsolete, purchased through grey schemes or at flea markets. These are no longer Shahed, but modified versions, Geran 2 and Geran 3. There is an increase in power, including through the installation of a new jet engine, which is also Chinese-made. In fact, this is an evolution, from the Iranian Shahed to the Russian Geran, and then to the Chinese Sunflower 200 drone, on the basis of which everything began. Gradually, the drone is becoming completely Chinese in its components. In addition, Chinese and North Korean engineers are involved in the project. Production has been set up in Labuga and Izhevsk, and these facilities have already been struck. Now the Russians and the Chinese are building a similar plant in North Korea, where they will probably produce geraniums for internal use by the DPRK as well. If necessary, the drones produced at the North Korean factory can be supplied to Russia as well. Thus, from the Iranian Shahed to the Russian-Chinese geranium, the drone has traveled a rather long but successful path. From the point of view of aerodynamics, the chosen wing was successful. It provides stability, controllability, and allows to lift a significant amount of explosives into the air. The basic mass of the warhead was 50 kilos. Now it reaches 90 kilos. Explosives are manufactured at various plants, including the plant in Sergiev Posad, which was recently hit. Thermobaric ammunition for the Gerani was also manufactured there. This is a complex that is constantly evolving, and its evolution must be closely monitored. This drone is becoming more and more dangerous. The accuracy of combat missions is increasing, and the ability to evade electronic warfare and air defense systems is improving. The warhead has almost doubled in size and has become versatile. In addition to fragmentation warheads, cluster and thermobaric charges are used. This makes the device extremely dangerous. It must be intercepted, especially in mass use, and this must be done along the front line. It is no longer enough to simply react. The time for preparation has passed. We should have rebuilt our defenses in advance and not waited for the Israelis to strike the Iranian factories that produce the Shaheds. It should be clearly realized that this is no longer an Iranian Shahed, but a Russian Chinese-made drone. This means the possibility of scaling up and increasing production volumes. Already 3 factories are almost ready for its serial production, and this will be a serious problem for us, which we will have to fight. It's possible but requires changes to air defense. The front line must be reinforced with mobile groups and short-range systems like Raven. If needed, we can start our own production. Manpads, anti-aircraft guns, machine guns, and a strong detection system are also key. A dense defensive zone at least 50 meters wide should be established along the front. We have about 2,000 kilometers of border, including the sea direction. To defend ourselves effectively, we need to saturate this line with mobile groups. We have several thousand of them. the consolidation of the frontline air defense system will make it possible to prevent Russian drones from massively penetrating the main territory. Penetrating targets must be destroyed in the rear. This applies both to drones and cruise missiles. Ballistic missiles can only be intercepted by missile defense means. To fight air targets, an echelon system should be used. At the top level, fighters such as F-16, MiG-29, Su-27, as well as Mirages, which have shown good results. Below that, light engine airplanes that need to be procured. A decision has already been taken to involve civilian pilots who have undergone retraining in combat missions. Next, the echelon defense system should use Army aviation helicopters, and at the lower level, medium and long-range surface-to-air missile systems. Such mechanisms are necessary for defense against Russian drones. Unless a shell-like structure is created over Ukraine, it will be extremely difficult to ensure security. New solutions have also emerged, such as interceptor drones, which can be used both for the defense of facilities and at the front. These technologies need to be developed in parallel with the enemy, or better yet, ahead of it, as has already happened with the idea of using light engine aviation, which we talked about last year. At that time, it was necessary to actively purchase such aircraft, including Brazilian models, and convert them into attack aircraft with machine gun armament. It is important not only to react, but also to anticipate the direction of development of threats in order to always be one step ahead and reliably defend the country's borders. Roman, regarding possible difficulties, there was information about a probable simultaneous attack by 1,000 Shahed drones. In your opinion, how much can such a number create a critical situation for Ukraine? And are our air defense forces able to cope with such a challenge? Russia produces 150-200 uraniums daily, allowing up to 1,000 drones to be launched weekly if unused. The challenge is finding enough targets. Identifying 1,000 at once is nearly impossible. Using the full arsenal would mean sending 10 to 50 drones per target, suggesting either an effort to overwhelm air defenses or a shortage of high-value targets. Russia may launch drones en masse to overload air defenses, allowing missiles to break through. This tactic is feasible, and its success depends on our ability to destroy up to 1,000 drones quickly. We must prepare in advance by strengthening frontline air defense, deploying mobile groups, and building layered defenses. If these proposals reach leadership, like the earlier decision to involve civilian pilots, there's hope for timely action.
Дойдет до нашего военно-политического руководства, то они в конце концов примут и это решение, так как приняли решение о возможности летать летчикам гражданской авиации на легкомоторных для того, чтобы уничтожать те же самые российские герои.
Roman, there is news that Russia's Federal State Statistics Service, Rosstat, has stopped publishing data on the number of deaths in the population. This decision was probably made as part of the Kremlin's efforts to conceal the losses of the Russian armed forces in the war against Ukraine. This is reported by the Institute for the Study of War. How reasonable is it to claim that Rosstat stopped publishing precisely because of the war? And how would you assess Russia's losses in general, particularly in the context of recent estimates of 1 million killed and wounded? These data are of interest, and it is important to hear your analysis. It is unlikely that the concealment of statistics is due solely to war losses in Ukraine. These figures are not comparable with the scale of natural population decline and mortality from other causes, such as traffic accidents. Most likely the reason is the Russians' realization of a deep demographic problem. The birth rate is significantly lower than the death rate, and this negative balance puts serious pressure on society. Since it is impossible to affect the birth rate quickly, the authorities are trying to reduce or hide the mortality data in order not to increase anxiety in society. From the point of view of internal logic, this is understandable. The population should not see the scale of attrition. Previously, the attitude was that women will have more children, but now the birth rate has fallen sharply. Perhaps both opportunities and desires have been exhausted. The demographic crisis in Russia is becoming more and more obvious.
И с точки зрения, допустим, военной, там бабы потом еще нарожают, но вот не рожают. Либо рожалки закончились, либо хотелки закончились, но что-то закончилось. У россиян сейчас большая проблема именно с демографической.
Roman, regarding Russia's losses, there's another point. Russian troops are being redeployed to Armenia. Ukrainian intelligence reported an order to select personnel for the base in Gyumri. What do you know about this? Is it reasonable to talk about worsening Russia-Armenia relations? Could this lead to a military conflict? How do you assess the situation? Armenians, Azeris, and Turks may be ahead of Russia in forming a stable and independent region. Russia has similar problems in the North Caucasus, but the situation is changing in the South Caucasus. Armenian President faces serious unrest in the North Caucasus, measured and consistent tensions among Dagestanis. He has already established relations with Azerbaijan and held a meeting with Erdogan. Explosions, this is a sign of strong and pragmatic military and oil infrastructure. If the three nations manage to overcome historical conflicts in the South Caucasus the last millennium Iran and get rid of their dependence on Russian influence, strengthening the region could become stable and more like delaying the inevitable. Such an alliance can create an island of security and development, free from external pressure. Russia understands this and realizes that it can be pushed out of this direction as a result of rapprochement between Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Turkey.
Президент Армении очень грамотно, очень правильно, Пашинян, он уже наладил отношения с Азербайджаном, уже встречался с тем же Эрдоганом, это сильный лидер на этом участке планеты. То есть, если у них все сложится, дай бог, чтобы сложилось, чтобы эти три народа в конце концов решили все свои вековые проблемы, которые еще с прошлого тысячелетия тянутся, и перестали отвлекаться на российское влияние или как-то ему поддаваться. Поверьте, там будет довольно-таки серьезный такой мирный островок, который, может быть, выдохнет, наконец, от российского влияния. То и россияне, понимая, что их могут оттуда просто выдавить сейчас, после этих хороших отношений между армянами, азербайджанцами и турками.
Russia is trying to strengthen its presence in the region, including attempts to sway internal discontent by relying on covert support. Such scenarios have already been realized, as was the case in 2014 in Donbass, when so-called green men appeared, which turned out to be Russian military personnel. Now similar preparations may be underway. Therefore, the governments of Armenia, Azerbaijan, and especially Turkey need to be extremely cautious and keep under control not only the official armed formations of Russia, but also the activities of agents of the Russian security services. These structures are active in the region, and their influence cannot be underestimated. Measures similar to those taken in the Baltic states, where a systematic cleansing of Russian influence has begun, should be considered. In the Baltics, the process is more complicated, but Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia are already demonstrating determination on internal security issues. A similar approach could be useful in the South Caucasus, especially in the face of the growing threat from Russia. Roman, in conclusion, I would like to ask about the investigation in the United States. The US president said that Elon Musk is losing control because he intends to create his own political party. Donald Trump said that such initiatives only create chaos. We are watching the conflict between Trump and Musk, and now Musk is talking about creating his own party. It is known that the US has a two-party system. What could this mean? How realistic is it that Musk could launch a political project? And could it affect Trump's positions in both domestic and foreign policy?
Це можливе якесь розхитування може вплинути на Трампа в внутрішній та зовнішній політиці.
Why call it chaos? It's a sign of democracy. The more parties, viewpoints, and ways to solve problems, the better. Open dialogue allows for solutions. In this light, Musk's initiative is worth supporting. His party could be a viable third option, alongside the Libertarians and others. US law allows new parties to join elections after a few years, though rebranding an existing one might be faster. From a democratic perspective, this is a positive development.
Я так думаю, что, может быть, это не будет создание новой партии, она ребрендинг какой-то старой, ну, посмотрим это, как МАС будет себя вести. С точки зрения развития демократического общества это неплохо.
For America, this could be one possible solution. Right now, the political system is too polarized. Everything comes down to a choice between Republicans and Democrats. This black and white model leads to constant confrontation, and society is already effectively divided. Increasing the number of parties could alleviate the tension, but it would be even more effective to switch from a party system to a majoritarian one. Then responsibility would lie with the individual, not with an abstract party structure. The voter would be able to directly influence their representative and hold them accountable. Besides, we live in the third millennium, and it is time to take into account the voice of every citizen in decision-making. Technology already makes it possible to realize this. Electronic platforms, digital voting. In the future, it is likely that other countries, including ours, will come to this. Roman, thank you for the conversation, your analysis and position. Roman Svitan is a flight instructor, colonel of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. The Ukrainian army responds to the most important challenges on a daily basis. Vladyslav Solovyov was with you. Friends, put likes to this video, leave comments on the topics we discussed. It's important because with your support the video will be seen by more people, including those in the temporarily occupied territories of Russia. Write what you think about the explosions we mentioned, about the suicide or elimination of the former minister, as well as about Trump's decision. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We'll see you on the air on 24.
Також не забувайте про підписку та побачимось в ефірі на 24-му.